Today's lesson is what is an invasive species? Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
Hello, I'm Kiki.
And today we're going to continue trying to answer the question, what is an invasive species? Well, we'll try to tell you what an invasive species is. And we did mention this concept in our last program. We talked about introduced species. And we talked about biodiversity, but mainly we talked about the fact that introduced species can come into a new environment by accident, or they can come there on purpose. And we left you last time with the example of someone bringing toads into Australia to control the beetle population there.
Right, and they've controlled the beetle population. However, the introduced species that they brought in, which were the cane toads, started to become notorious pests. So they themselves, the toad that were originally supposed to be here to solve the problem, have become a new problem.
Okay, and you can probably think of some other examples here in Taiwan of introduced species, whether they were brought in on purpose or whether they kind of snuck in. I remember many years ago there was a problem of fire ants in Taiwan. Somehow they got into Taiwan and they were causing problems, but I haven't heard about that problem in many years. So good on Taiwan's government for taking care of that problem. They don't seem to be a problem anymore, but that is an example of an invasive species causing problems or wreaking havoc on the local ecosystem. Well, let's talk some more about this particular topic in today's lesson. We'll listen now to the first part, and we'll come back to discuss it.
Invasive species pose significant threats because they often outcompete local species for resources, disrupt food chains, and dramatically alter habitats. Additionally, the invaders' presence can damage crops, fisheries, and infrastructure, costing billions of dollars each year. In Taiwan, for instance, the green iguana is an invasive species that damages irrigation infrastructure, while the golden apple snail is one that causes significant losses to rice farmers every year.
大家好，首先第一部分我们来看动词 outcompete， 它的意思是战胜或是竞争中的取胜。例如After a fierce fight, the younger lion outcompeted his opponent and won the whole territory. 在经过一番激烈的打斗后，较年轻的狮子战胜他的对手，并赢得了全部的领土。又或者说 Matt's witty reactions let him outcompete in this game. Matt 机智的反应使他在这场比赛中取胜。接下来看到动词 disrupt， 意思是扰乱或是使中断、打断。例如Angry protesters disrupted the politician's press conference. 愤怒的抗议者扰乱那名政客的记者会。或是 The sudden earthquake disrupted the students and teachers in class. 突如其来的地震打断了正在上课的学生和老师们。再来是动词 alter， 这个字是改变、变更或是更改的意思。例如 The season rarely alters in some areas. 某些地区的季节不常更替。或者 Marie altered the recipe to suit the taste buds of the locals. Marie 修改了食谱，以迎合当地人的味蕾。
Okay, so again, we're talking about invasive species in today's lesson. Like, for example, here in Taiwan, we have the African snail. It's causing problems, and it's not supposed to be here, but it is an invasive species. And invasive species pose significant threats because they often outcompete local species for resources, disrupt food chains, and dramatically alter habitats. So I should mention that the word species here could be singular and plural. We're talking about invasive species in the plural here. They pose significant threats. They are a threat for various reasons. First of all, they outcompete local species for resources. If you outcompete someone for something, you tend to win the competition for that thing. So yes, these invasive species get more of the local food than the local plants or animals get.
And because these invasive species outcompete local species, they also disrupt food chains. So we know a food chain is basically the different levels of nature that eat each other. So for example, an herbivore will eat a plant and a predator will eat that herbivore. So for example, a lion will eat a smaller animal and that smaller animal might eat the plant. And when these animals die, the lion, when it dies, it'll go back into the earth and it will grow again into another plant. And that is basically the circle of life. So it's very normal for nature to happen. And you have this food chain, different animals eating each other. And when a food chain is disrupted, or basically when the food chain has been interrupted or disturbed because of the new invasive species, it becomes a problem because that means the existing animals or the existing living things that are in the area, they're going to have a harder time looking for food.
Right, so those invasive species can disrupt food chains. To disrupt means to disturb or to interfere. And for example, I could say the typhoon disrupted traffic on the freeway. No one could drive on the freeway because of all the rain. And of course, also invasive species can alter habitats. To alter just means to change things. So basically, these new species move in and the original species have to move out because they can't compete with the new species. They're just too tough. They're just too strong. Additionally, the invaders' presence can damage crops, fisheries, and infrastructure, costing billions of dollars each year. So again, we've got these invaders, animals or plants that come from outside, and they can damage crops, which is food that people grow to eat. And a fishery is a place where fish are raised in order for people to eat them. We've also got infrastructure, which is basically the basic foundation of a society. And in this particular case, the infrastructure is talking about the basic construction of the food industry with farms and things like that, and with forests and other related industries or areas. And of course, these invasive species or these invaders can cause problems with those systems.
And while they damage our crops, fisheries, and infrastructure, it can cost billions of dollars each year. So while these invaders have come and they've started to disrupt our natural habitats, it causes a lot of damage. And so the government will need to spend a lot of money to either try to fix things, or even the people that are involved in the food industry, they can have a big hit on it. They can be heavily affected because they have less of the crops to sell, or the fisheries are affected. Maybe the fish die. So a lot of farmers and people that are involved in agriculture, they would be affected a lot as well, which will cost them a lot of money. And in Taiwan, for instance, the green iguana is an invasive species that damages irrigation infrastructure, while the golden apple snail is one that causes significant losses to rice farmers every year.
Right, so of course we've got iguanas. It's kind of like a lizard, and I understand they're quite common down in the south, and they cause problems down there, and it damages irrigation infrastructure. Irrigation is spreading water around to grow plants and things like that. We've also got the example of the golden apple snail, and that's one that causes significant losses to rice farmers every year. If you're a rice farmer, you probably know about this particular kind of snail. They're all over the place, and they're impossible to get rid of, but they still cause damage to rice crops every year. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson. Let's listen now to the second part.
Addressing the problem of invasive species requires approaching it from a number of angles. Strict measures at international borders, including the inspection of cargo and treatment of ballast water, help prevent the unintentional importation of invasive species. On top of that, environmental projects should focus on protecting and restoring native populations. Meanwhile, public awareness campaigns should be conducted to engage an area's people in tracking and managing invasive species.
第二部分介绍名词 inspection， 它的意思是检查、审视或是检阅。例如 I drove my truck to the shop for a safety inspection. 我把我的卡车开去店里做安全检查。或是 The restaurant did not pass its annual hygiene inspection and had to close down. 该餐厅未通过年度的卫生检查而不得不关闭。接着看到片语 on top of 名词，表示除了点点点之外。例如 On top of his regular job, Luke also does some volunteer work. 除了平常的工作 Luke 还会从事一些志工工作。或者 Mona's bike was stolen, and on top of that, she lost her phone. Mona 的脚踏车被偷了，除此之外，她还弄丢了手机。
Let's talk about the second part where we start to address the problem of invasive species. So, how do people deal with the invasive species problems? Well, addressing the problem requires approaching it from a number of angles. So, in order to deal with the problem of the invasive species, you need to look at it from different points of view. So, approaching it from a number of angles means to look at the problem from different sides. This includes strict measures at international borders, including the inspection of cargo and treatment of ballast water, help prevent the unintentional importation of invasive species.
Okay, so we need to have these strict measures put in place, which are procedures that are carried out when we have people coming into the country or when we have shipping vessels coming in. We need to have these measures, which include the inspection of cargo and treatment of ballast water. So inspection means they take a look at the things that are coming in to make sure there are no problems, to make sure there are no invasive species trying to come in. And we've got that problem of ballast water. And again, these measures help prevent the unintentional importation of invasive species. So if something's unintentional, people did not mean to do that. It was by accident, but some of these organisms are so small they just can't see them and they have no idea that they're coming along on a piggyback ride from someplace overseas and coming into Taiwan. And when something comes from outside and comes inside, that is to import, or that is importation. That is the noun form.
On top of that, or additionally, environmental projects should focus on protecting and restoring native populations. So not only should we take care of things at the borders or inspect cargoes, we should also do things locally to try to protect and restore native species. So native are the species that originally come from this country or come from the land and they're from this place. So when you start a sentence by saying on top of that, usually it means that additional to something else. So additional to doing all those things at the borders, we should look at environmental projects, or we should do things locally to try to protect the things that are native, that are local to our population or to the land.
So on top of that, in addition to that, we should do these things. Meanwhile, public awareness campaigns should be conducted to engage an area's people in tracking and managing invasive species. So, of course, we've got these campaigns that are designed to let people know about this problem. It's a public awareness campaign. A campaign is a series of activities or advertisements or whatever that try to bring about some kind of change or to introduce people to some information. We have political campaigns going on all the time. When there's an election coming up, people want to get elected, so they have a political campaign. Hey, vote for me. I'm the best candidate available. And yes, these campaigns should be carried out or conducted to engage the people in the area in tracking and managing those invasive species. So here we've got the phrase to engage in. That just means you get involved with something.
So when you have these public awareness campaigns, you're trying to get people's attention and trying to teach them about certain issues, and you want to ask the people to get involved and to help take care or help solve these problems that might be existing. And in this case, invasive species, when they do come into different countries, usually people will try to get the public to be known of these issues, and then that way they could be more aware of what to do or how to prevent these invasive species from spreading even more.
That makes a lot of sense, and this, of course, is especially important for the good people of Taiwan because Taiwan does depend a lot on international trade. And, of course, we can have all sorts of nasty creatures coming into Taiwan, and we won't even know anything about it. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's wrap things up by listening now to the third part.
Invasive species are a global challenge that demands collective action, but individuals can do their part by not shipping or carrying species that could become invasive and by supporting conservation efforts. Working together, we can reduce the effects of invasive species and protect the amazing variety of life on our planet for future generations.
第三部分最后来看片语 do one's part， 意思是尽一己之力或是尽某人的职责。比如说 Everyone must do their part to maintain the environment in which we live. 每个人都必须尽自己的一份力量来维护我们居住的环境。最后一个例子 The zookeepers do their part to take care of animals and protect them. 动物保育员善尽他们的职责来保护和照顾动物。
Okay, so here we say invasive species are a global challenge that demands collective action, but individuals can do their part by not shipping or carrying species that could become invasive and by supporting conservation efforts. So everybody in the world is involved with this. Of course, we live in the global village and we're trading with each other all the time. So we need this collective action. We all need to work together. But as individuals, we can do our part by not shipping or carrying species that could be invasive. So if you do your part, you just play your role, you just make your little contribution, and hopefully when we all do this, it will be a collective action and will bring about some change.
So when we do our part in this collective action, we can try not to ship or carry species that could become invasive. And we can support conservation efforts. So conservation is basically the prevention of the wasteful use of resources, or in this case, a way to protect something. So conservation efforts is basically to try to protect the living organisms that are already existing. And you can have different types of conservation efforts. For example, you can have water conservation efforts, which are different campaigns that people can do together to try to save more water. And even there are beach cleanup efforts, so beach conservation. There are many groups in Taiwan that go out on weekends and they do beach cleanup together as part of their conservation effort.
Indeed. So conservation just refers to the preservation or protection or restoration of the natural environment, also of natural ecosystems. You're trying to protect vegetation and wildlife and all that good stuff. And so we have to support these conservation efforts, and maybe we can even join a beach cleanup, as you said, to help try to protect the environment. And working together, we can reduce the efforts of invasive species and protect the amazing variety of life on our planet for future generations. So again, the key here is to work together to have some collective action, and we can reduce the effects of invasive species around the world. And of course, we did mention some examples of invasive species here in Taiwan. It is a problem here, so we do need to be aware of this, and we don't want those nasty creatures from overseas coming into Taiwan and causing problems.
And it's important for us as travelers to know what we're bringing into a new country that might be harmful to the place that we're going to. So we can do our research before we do our traveling and see if we're bringing anything in that isn't welcomed. And also for governments, it's important for them to share with travelers as well about things that might be invasive to their country.
Indeed. So, of course, not only do we need to worry about invasive species coming into Taiwan, but we also need to worry about taking things out of Taiwan and introducing them to other countries' environments. That is not a nice thing to do either. So, again, we need to all work together on this problem, and hopefully we'll be one big, happy global family in the future. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. It's time now to listen to Henny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分提到，在国际边境实行严格的措施，包含货物检查与压舱水的处理，有助于防止非刻意引进入侵物种。那文中它用到 including the inspection of cargo 来表达包含货物检查什么什么什么的。那这边我们先来比较一下 including、included 还有 inclusive 的用法。好，来看到 including 它是介系词，表示说包含包括，那它的用法是 including 加上名词。举例来说， Everyone including the principal enjoyed the speech。 所有的人包括校长都很喜欢那场演讲。那么 included 则是形容词，是表达包括在内的，被包括的。它的用法是名词加上 included。像刚刚的例句，我也可以把它改成 Everyone, the principal included, enjoyed the speech。 好，再来看到的是 inclusive， 它是形容词，那它的用法会是 inclusive of 加名词，这是比较正式的用法。像 These prices are not inclusive of tax， 这些价格不含税。好，接着我们看到 inspection 这个名词呢，它是表达检查、审视或是检阅。那它是来自动词 inspect， 我们来学它的字首字根。这个字根 S-P-E-C-T 或是拼作 S-P-E-C， 它有看、看见或是查看的意思。在 inspect 这个字当中，它的字首 IN 表示往内，那么 spect 表示看，合在一起往里面仔细的看，应该就可以联想到 inspect， 它有检视、检验或是审查的意思咯。通常是指说为了找出是否有错误、有问题而仔细检查。好，那我们这边补充几个有相同字根的单字。第一个是 prospect， 它的字首 P-R-O 表示向前，字根 spect 表示看。那当我们向前看，看向远方时，就会看到景色嘛。所以呢 prospect 它可以指具体的景象、景色，尤其是指高处看到的景色。那它其实还有抽象的含义，可以表达前景、展望等等的意思哦。好，第二个补充的是 suspect， 它的字首 S-U-S 是来自 S-U-B， 表示在下方。那么字根 spect 表示观看，在底下偷偷观察、偷偷看，那就表示不信任嘛。Suspect 这个字当形容词是表达可疑的、不可信的，当名词是指嫌疑犯。那么当动词念作 suspect， 它则有那种怀疑、猜疑的意思。好，第三个补充的是 expect， 它是由字首 EX 表示向外，还有 spect 组合而成，只是因为这个 EX 它的尾音 X 和 spect 的那个 S发音产生的同化现象，所以 spect 摆在 EX 后面呢，只剩下 PECT 了。好，再看到这个字首 EX 表示向外嘛，刚刚有提到，那么字根 spect 它表示看，我们就可以用那种向外看，期待着某人某事物的到来，用这个画面去联想说 expect 它有期待啊、期望、预期的意思咯。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Disrupt. My neighbor's loud music disrupted my focus while I was trying to study. Alter. Laura has decided to alter her daily routine to include more exercise. Infrastructure. The government is building a number of new roads and bridges as part of its big infrastructure project. Measure. One measure we took to reduce our electricity bill was switching to more efficient light bulbs. Inspection. The quality control team performs an inspection of each product before it leaves the factory. Campaign. Lamar has started a campaign for election as student council president. Conservation. A new conservation program is helping to protect the local bear population.
Discussion starter starts now.
Here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, apart from the invasive species mentioned in the article, what other invasive species are you aware of? And what kind of damage do these species typically cause?
One example of an invasive species, or actually it's several types of invasive species, there are different groups of frogs that are invasive to Taiwan's natural ecosystem. And because they reproduce and outcompete the local ecosystem and outcompete local species of frogs, they are fighting for food, and so the local species of frogs are losing and they have nowhere to go, so there are less and less of our local frogs.
That's tragic indeed, and of course in addition to frogs, we've got invasive species in terms of birds and insects and things like that. So, of course, I am familiar with various species of birds, and they cause damage to the ecosystem by, again, maybe eating the food that the native birds usually eat, and they also attack their nests and kill their young, so that is a big problem.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Kiki.
I am Roger.
See you next time.